Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. My name is Brian. I'm a first-year pre-theologian at St. John's Seminary in Brighton, Massachusetts. And as you can tell behind me here, I'm not currently at St. John's anymore. I am at St. Mary's Parish, right here in Denham, Massachusetts, in the second floor of the parish center. And the reason for that is, given our current situation, the seminary cannot continue to operate as normal, and Father Wayne, Father Dominic, and Bishop Kennedy have been gracious enough to allow myself, as well as 3 other seminarians, to reside with them, to continue our formation, our way of life, and perhaps almost as importantly, allowed us to eat with them as well. And you can imagine what that's like. So please continue to give them your love and your support. And most importantly, of course, please continue to give them, as well as us, your prayers, as we will for you. So these next series of days that we know as the Easter Triduum, the Catholic liturgical calendar, culminate in the death and resurrection of Christ and are thus the most important days for us the entire year. So myself and the other seminarians are going to be giving you a series of talks, each corresponding to the day for which they're being given, and they'll be posted online, I think on the St. Mary's Life Teen YouTube page. In any case, they'll be posted on the website, so we encourage you to tune in, check them out, and again, please continue to give the parish your love and your support, and most importantly, your prayers, as we will for you. So without further ado, here's Holy Thursday. Thanks for tuning in. So if we look to chapter 22 of Luke's Gospel, we hear Jesus utter the very familiar words, "Do this in remembrance of me." Now obviously this has a huge amount of significance for us as Catholics for a number of reasons. And we can derive meaning from this particular passage in many ways, but one lesser known way perhaps is found by looking to the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is also known as the Septuagint. Now the word for do we get from the word poio in Greek, which also can translate to the word offer in English, which is a particular high level of significance within the framework within which we're analyzing this passage. In the Old Testament times, the sacrificial offerings that were made directly to the divine were reserved for priests. And there are many examples of this. If we look at Leviticus chapter 14, for instance, like the slaughtering of the lamb for the curing of skin diseases, or in chapter 5 of Leviticus, the ram offered as a guilt offering for sins committed. But most interestingly, I think anyway, in Exodus chapter 29, we see God give very, very detailed instructions for how he wants the ordination of priests to work. And he's giving these instructions to Moses, to Aaron, and his sons throughout Exodus 29, which, by the way, interestingly enough, involves the making of unleavened bread. So there are many things that we can obviously connect directly to the sacrifice that Jesus offers at the Last Supper. But we've got another word. That's not all. We've got another word in this passage in Luke chapter 22 when Jesus says the words, "Do this in remembrance of me." And that word is remembrance. And remembrance is translated from the Greek word anamnesis. So what's the particular significance of remembrance, and what does this have to do specifically with the priesthood? Well, if we look at Numbers chapter 10, God, at the beginning of the passage, asks Moses to make 2 silver trumpets. Now, these silver trumpets were to be blown mostly for calling meetings outside the tent of meeting. Now, the tent of meeting is basically the ancient version of the Jewish tabernacle. And this was a more mobile version of the Jewish tabernacle because it had to travel with the Israelites wherever God called them at the time. And the tent of meeting contained all sorts of sacred things that we're familiar with nowadays. Veils, incense, vestments, and of course the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the significance of these trumpets is that only the priests and the sons of Aaron that we just talked about were allowed to blow the trumpets. Well, why? Well, if we look at verse 10 of the same passage, we hear the words, "When you rejoice on your festivals and your new moon feasts, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and your communion sacrifices, so that this serves as a reminder, or anamnesis, of you before your God. For I, the Lord, am your God." Now, what about the washing of the feet? So if we look at Exodus chapter 40, we can see God giving Moses very similar instructions, how he wants him to set up the tent of meeting, how he wants the incense lit, how the veils are to be set up outside the entrance, how to decorate the altar, which candles to light on the menorah, how he wants the consecration to go. And by the time we get to verse 12 of the passage, we discover that this isn't any ordinary ritual that he's asking Moses to set up for it. The particular ritual that God wants him to set up for is an ordination to the priesthood. And as part of this ordination, interestingly enough, Aaron and his sons were to be washed with water and adorned with sacred vestments to become God's priests. And it gets even more interesting as the passage goes on. By the time we get to verse 30 of the passage, God asks Moses to, quote, set up a basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it for washing, where both Moses and Aaron and his sons, who were God's priests, would wash both their hands and their feet. So obviously we can see the direct connection here to the New Testament passage that we were just talking about. It's very interesting, and this is only one small example of the manifold ways throughout the ministry of Christ that we see these connections. It's really remarkable.